I teach at Clemson University in South Carolina, and Tigers, yeah. One of my classes is an intro to fiction writing class, which generally I get stories in there that combine outlandish plots with college social situations. You know, aliens abducted me during the beer pong tournament, that kind of thing. And so I decided to write one of these myself. So I'm going to read a little bit of that. Let's see what time it is. This is called My Roommate Kevin is Awesome. Totally. This is like after we moved into the dorms in the fall and kind of got to know each other pretty well, and then we sort of got bored with shit like staying around the dorms all the time and going to classes. So we went to this place where this guy made us fake IDs, quote, for amusement purposes only, not a legal form of identification. And we tried to use them at this bar downtown, but the guy just laughed at us and took our IDs, and we were out $40. So we were walking back to the dorms, and Kevin said, "College sucks, dude. This is lame. I'm totally fucking bored with this shit. There's nothing to do. Nothing ever happens." And I said, "We should have pledged a fraternity." And Kevin said, "Yeah, right, like they'd take us." Then the next morning I woke up in the sleeping room where there's bunk beds and you have to like share the room with the two guys who live on the other side, and they both study all the time and are carrying 4.0 GPAs. And I went into our main dorm room and there was Kevin hanging upside down in the air. He was just hanging there like on one of those gravity boot machines that were like the hip thing back in the day, only he was just hanging upside down there in the air with nothing attached to him. I said, "Kevin, how are you doing that?" And he said he didn't know. And I told him his face was pretty red and he should probably turn over. And he said he didn't know how. I thought that was pretty funny, so I laughed for a minute, but then he really did look like he was about to pop a blood vessel or something. So I said, "Why don't you try bending your knees like on a swing, you know, get some locomotion happening." So he did that, and it was just like he was on one of those flying trapeze things. He looked like he was in the circus. But finally, when he got going good enough, he tried to swing himself around, but he only got halfway and busted his ass on the floor. So he didn't want to try it again for a while, but after a while he did. And pretty soon he got better and better and started doing flips. And he would hold his legs tight against his chest like a ball and spin really fast. I thought it was pretty cool. So I went and knocked on some other guys' doors around the hall, and they came and watched. And pretty soon started calling their friends and everything. And by that afternoon, we had like this humongous crowd of people in the room watching Kevin spin around in the air. There were even these frat guys who kept saying it was a trick, and so I told them to try it themselves, and they all did, and just kept falling over on the floor, and everyone laughed at them, even the girls, and one of them actually hurt himself pretty bad. It was definitely a very entertaining day, and that night Kevin even got with this little hottie, Kristen, who was a junior, and I swear had only hooked up with maybe 3 other guys the whole time she'd been in college, from what I heard. Kevin went to her apartment and didn't come home until about 4 a.m., but then he shook me awake in my bunk really early because he wanted me to watch him do a swan dive. But when he jumped up, nothing happened, and he came down and cracked his knees on the tile floor. So he was yelling in pain, and the 2 dudes we shared the room with, who were like totally gay, woke up and started complaining. I got out of there and went in our room in my underwear. Only when I got in our room, there was this very grizzled-haired old black guy with sunglasses sitting on our couch, and it scared the shit out of me. He didn't even act like he noticed me, though. Like he was practically frozen there with his hands on his knees. And I put on some sweats and a t-shirt, and by that time he was starting to look pretty familiar. I slipped back real quiet into the sleeping room where Kevin was kind of hobbling around. "Kevin," I said, "Ray Charles is in our dorm room." "Who?" he said. "Ray fucking Charles," I said. "Who's he?" Kevin said. "Is he an RA?" And he looked kind of worried for a second. And I told him no. Ray Charles was like this really kick-ass musician from way back in the day who might even supposed to be dead now because they made a movie about him, and who my Uncle Doug was always trying to get me to listen to when I was little because he said my dad had really bad taste and would listen to like Bob Seger. So we went out in the room and there was Ray Charles sitting on our couch. "Told you so," I said. Ray Charles seemed to kind of hear me then, like his hands moved and he sort of turned his head in my direction, and Kevin went over to him and stuck his hand out for him to shake. Only nothing happened, and I tapped Kevin on the arm and kind of made this motion like, "Check out the sunglasses." And then I put my hands out in front of me and shut my eyes and groped around the air to say to Kevin like he's blind. So Kevin nodded and he went up next to Ray Charles and said, "Mr. Charles, I'm pleased to make your acquaintance. I'm Kevin. Can I shake your hand?" And Ray Charles seemed sort of startled, but he put his hand out and they shook. Then we asked him if we could get him anything, and he said a glass of water, so Kevin got him one. Then we asked him if he was feeling okay, and he said yes, but he was a little confused about where he was and what was happening, and he had things he was supposed to do today. So we went ahead and explained to him how Kevin was like flying around in the air yesterday, but how he couldn't do it today, so maybe it was only a one-day thing. And Ray Charles kind of smiled and waved his head around and said, okay then, he would just hang out with us, quote, cats that day. So he did, and it was awesome. We had the whole big crowd over again, and lots of people got his autograph, and there were even some grad students who came by that actually really liked his music and asked him questions about being dead and stuff. But it got to be sort of a hassle because they wanted to bring this one professor of theirs by to, quote, verify the phenomenon, and we had to tell them, like, no fucking professors, no way. And then they were cool. We got Ray Charles to do a piano performance in the student lounge down the hall where they have a piano, and a whole huge crowd was there, and people seemed to like the music, and even Ray Charles seemed to have a good time. And that night we drove him to the store and he bought us beer, and me and Kevin by now were like the coolest guys in the whole university. Next morning we woke up and Ray Charles wasn't there, but in his place was this huge spread of real homemade breakfast foods, like right there on our desks. Waffles and bacon and ham and all kinds of fruit and French toast and blueberry pancakes and these drinks in tall glasses that we didn't know what they were, but they definitely had alcohol in them. And when we called Kristen and her friend Megan to come over, Megan said it was mimosas. And the best part was, as soon as you ate or drank any of the stuff, it would all just reappear, or there would be different good stuff in its place. By about noon, we were already pretty drunk, and a bunch of people had come by again, and there were these really excellent sandwiches like you'd get from a catering service or something, and still lots of fruit and lemon meringue pie for dessert and beer. So we had this big party. The only uncool part was when the two guys who shared our sleeping room from next door complained to the RA about the noise and how there were so many people around all hours of the day and night. But Gordon, the RA, was a pretty cool dude, and he just came and told us to keep the noise down. And then when he saw how this totally awesome thing was happening with all the food and the drinks, he stayed around and got drunk with us, and the douchebags from next door had to go to the library to study. Around 7 o'clock, there was suddenly, quote, beef Wellington, according to Gordon, and these really dusty bottles of wine that Gordon said were probably worth like $1,000 each, and they tasted okay if you guzzled them fast, and then authentic Cuban cigars. Then later, when the party was getting really huge, a keg of Heineken appeared, and these incredibly excellent margaritas started blending themselves right there on the desk. And then, to top it all off, when most people were leaving because they had to go to class the next day, a huge baggie of killer weed that like totally fried your brain on one hit, but you could still maintain and hold a conversation. Then we went to bed. I was the first one up in the morning, and when I went into our room to see what the day's events had in store, there was nothing there. Just our regular dorm room, except that all the empties were magically cleaned up and put in the recycling bin. But that was it. I was like freaked out because you could already hear a whole bunch of people out in the hall waiting for us to wake up and unlock the door and like initiate the entertainment. I went in the sleeping room and woke Kevin up and told him. So when he came out with me, there was suddenly this gigantic blue and yellow butterfly like perched on the back of his chair. So I figured out then it only happened when Kevin woke up, not me. I was kind of disappointed, but then I thought, you know, how Kevin was an awesome dude and my roommate and my best friend. The butterfly wasn't quite as exciting as the other days. I mean, it just sat there kind of spreading out its wings and making these loud sucking noises like it was hungry, but we didn't know what to feed it. But still, it was a huge butterfly with about a 5-foot wingspan, so it was pretty impressive. And tons of people came by to see it and like marvel at its amazing vibrant colors. That night, Kevin and I were talking, and I said, dude, this is all about you. And he said, I don't know what I did, man. What did I do? And we couldn't come up with much of an explanation, except that Kevin said maybe he had like reached this utter peak of boredom. Like he had become more monumentally bored than any person in the history of the world, and this had all happened as a result. Then we went to bed. Thanks. I'll stop there.